Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, the program where I talk about comic books, cartoons, and comic book conventions. This is episode 137. All past episodes can be streamed or downloaded from the program's website, davetalkscomics.com. In addition to the program's website, this podcast can also be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook. You can find my notes on what I have read at davetalkscomicsnotes.blogspot.com. On this episode, I continue my coverage of Heroes Con 2017. The bulk of this episode is the recording I made at the end of the first day of the convention. I talk about what I bought, people I talked to, and the panels I went to. I'm back from day one of Heroes Con 2017, so that is June 16th. It's about 11 o'clock, maybe quarter after 11 right now. And for the most part, I think I had a really good time today. I think I had a good time. I don't think it was like super exciting, but I think I had a good time. I definitely bought some books. I went to some good panels. I went out and had a couple good meals. And I think I'm going to talk about all that right now. I'm going to try to do it in a chronological way. And we'll see how that works out. So the first thing that I want to mention is that I took this camping stool with me, which folds up nicely and easily. It's very light. It's very easy to carry. And it fit into one of the bags that I carry with me. I have like a messenger bag that I had strapped across my back sometimes. And then every once in a while that would start to get to be a bit too much. And because it was kind of heavy with all the stuff I had in there. And so then I would carry it in my hand for a while, and eventually I'd switch hands, and eventually I'd put it on my back. But I also had another lighter bag that I was putting a lot of the stuff that I was buying in there. But so it was easy to fold up and stick in there. I used it when I was waiting in line before the show opened. I used it at least once to just sit down in the lobby and make some notes. And I also used it when I was down on the show floor, when I was digging through some comic book bins that were on the floor. It was very convenient, so I didn't have to kneel on the hard cement floor or sit or whatever it is or crouch. I was just able to. It was much more comfortable than any of those options. So the show opened around 11, and that's about the time I got in. As usual, it wasn't very crowded. I walked around quite a bit. I think I stuck to the retail section in the beginning, and my plan was to go to lunch around 12:30. So eventually I found some comic bins. Well, I looked through a lot of comic bins, but the only place that I ended up buying stuff from during this portion of the day was a retailer who didn't have a huge number of comic books, but I found some. They didn't have a huge number of dollar bins. Let's put it that way. They had other comics that cost more than $1, but I went through their dollar bins, and I wasn't looking for anything in particular, although I do have a want list. But I ran across some issues of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, this is a comic book that was published by Marvel, but to my knowledge has never been reprinted and probably never will be because it's tied up in there's all sorts of ownership issues there, probably with the studio or whomever owns the rights to the comic book, because I believe the comic book was an extension of the movie. And to my knowledge, there was a treasury-sized comic book, and I think that came first. And then there was a comic book series which ran for about 10 or 12 issues, something like that. I know it ran for at least 10 because one of the issues I bought today was number 10. That was the highest number one I bought. And this is the series that introduced Machine Man, Aaron Stack, X-51. And I remember reading a couple Machine Man comics back when I was a kid, but So I saw these, and they were only $1. They weren't in great shape, but still, they're hard to find for less than like $2 or $3 a piece online, and I have hesitated on pulling the trigger on buying any of these online. So the issues I found were issues 4, 5, 6, 7, and 10. So I bought all those at this point during the convention, and that's right. And then I wandered around a little more. I stopped at Josh Greathouse's table, and he was one of the artists who I had ordered a commission from, and he did a commission of Deathlock for me, which I like very much. And so I picked that up, and we talked a little bit about cartoons, mostly about anime. He has a new print out. He did a print last year that I bought of Samurai Jack from Jack and the Three Blind Archers, I believe was the name of the episode, from the first season of Samurai Jack. And this year he has a print of an episode of Cowboy Bebop, another series that I love, and another series that I want to go back and rewatch so that I can make all sorts of notes and analyze it to death. I believe the episode that I didn't buy the print. I just picked up the commission, the head sketch of Deathlock, but I believe the episode that he covered, that his print was called Asteroid Blues, and it's been a number of years since I watched that show. I've watched it all the way through twice. I loved it both times, and there was a number of years in between those two viewings. I think the first time was probably back around 2001 or something like that, and probably the next time was probably around 2008. So it's probably been about 10 years since I watched it. I'm really not sure. And I don't know, I might be able to figure out, because I do have some records of my TV viewing, so I might be able to figure out when the last time I watched it. I may even be able to figure out when the first time I watched it, because I'm pretty sure it was DVD rentals, and I have all my records from Netflix of my DVD rentals back in the day when Netflix didn't do streaming video, when they just did DVD rentals by mail. So we talked a little bit about cartoons and anime, but not for too long. So then I moved on. I wandered around some more. Eventually, I wound up at Mike Myhack's table, and Mike has done. I've bought a few things from him over the years. He did a sketch for me of Jack of Hearts back in 2012, I want to say. Yeah, I don't think it was 2000. It might have even been 2011. I'd have to look at the sketch to figure that out, or look online at my website. But he did a sketch for me of Jack of Hearts. I remember after which he said, "I'm never drawing this character again because there's way too much detail in his uniform." But what I bought a print, and actually both of these things that I bought were going to be presents for my niece. I bought a print of the Fantastic Four as cats, the Fantastic Cats, and I think Dr. Doom is even in it too. And then I also bought the first volume of his comic book Cleopatra. So I hope she'll enjoy both of them. I'm not going to give them to her right away. They'll probably be either a birthday present or a Christmas present, both of which are, about 6-7 months away. So that was basically it for the first part of the day. It was about 12:40. I left the showroom floor to go get a bite to eat. I wound up going to a place called the Dandelion Market, which, as I understand it, the original Dandelion Market is in Dublin, in Ireland, I think. Anyhow, I walked up there. It's up near Mertz. It's like 2 blocks from Mertz, so you got to walk all the way up to practically to Mertz, and then you turn left, and walk over a couple blocks on 5th, and that takes you to the Dandelion Market. It's not real apparent. They don't have like a huge sign, but it's not that hard to find if you know where it is. But I walked in. There weren't any tables, but there was space at the bar, so I sat at the bar. I had a beer. I asked them what dark beers they had available on tap, and the first thing that the bartender mentioned was a chocolate mint stout. And I'd never even heard of a chocolate mint stout, let alone tasted one. So I decided I had to have that. So I had a chocolate mint stout, and it wasn't a pint. It was like, one of those, I don't know, 10 or 12 ounce glasses, I'm guessing. It definitely was not a full pint. And then I ordered a tuna salad sandwich with potato salad on the side. I wasn't crazy about the sandwich. There was nothing wrong with the sandwich. It was just a little bland. It didn't have a whole lot of taste to it. I think that was the problem. It wasn't. Nothing tasted bad or didn't taste fresh. There just wasn't a whole lot of taste to it. In fact, the potato salad I think was better than the sandwich. Although the beer was probably the best part of the meal. The meal didn't take as long as I anticipated. I allowed myself an hour and a half for that, but I think I was back by within an hour. I think, or maybe even 50 minutes. But on the way back, I stopped at Amelie's, which is a bakery, which is like just a block from the convention center. It can sometimes be overloaded, especially in the mornings of the convention. I think I tried to go in there on Sunday last year. Yes, I think it was Sunday last year, and there was just a line about 40 or 50 people deep, and I just decided, forget it, I'm not waiting that long. But there wasn't much of a line today. I mean, it was probably around 2... No, wait, no, it wasn't that late. It was probably around 1:15, 1:20 when I got there. And so what I wanted was a cookie. I ended up getting 2 mixed berry macaroons, I think. I think that's what they were called. Although they weren't... No, I don't think they were macaroons. I'm not sure what they were. But, I mean, they were very tasty. They were a little expensive considering the size. I paid $5 for both of them, and they weren't very big. I don't need cookies to be real big, but considering how much I was paying, but then again, you're in the business district, so I guess prices are going to be inflated there. So I went back to the convention center. I sat down. I did a little bit of writing and about my day up to that point, because I had yet to do that, took stock of how much money I had spent. And then a little before 2 o'clock, I went upstairs to go to the Michael Golden panel. I wasn't sure entirely what to expect from the Michael Golden panel. The panel basically consisted of Michael Golden and a moderator, who was Eric Nolan Wethington. He was not supposed to be the moderator. Originally, the moderator was going to be Michael Urie. Both of them work for Tomorrow's. I'm somewhat familiar with Michael Golden's work, at least his work as a penciler and as a visual storyteller, and not just a visual storyteller from what I learned during this panel. He wrote and drew he drew Micronauts, which I covered in the podcast. He drew also the NAM, the first 12 issues of Micronauts, which began in 1979. The first 12 issues of the NAM comic book. And a few other things. He also drew Avengers Annual number 10. And so I was familiar with his work, unlike some artists who don't. He doesn't have a huge body of work, and he spent a lot of time during this panel kind of talking defensively about problems he saw with the industry, and without a point of comparison, it's really hard to know how much I want to believe him, but at the same time, I would like an independent opinion or a second opinion on him from somebody who was on the other side of the table, and then maybe another opinion on somebody who's seen both he and the people who he's worked with, he's dealt with. So the panel began by Eric asking him questions about his influences, which basically were science fiction influences, and also Tintin. Talked a little bit about Asimov and Tom Swift and Clifford Simak's The City. He talked a little bit about Harry Potter, who he doesn't love, but he's learned to respect what the author's doing. He's somebody who started off in commercial art. He's been a commercial artist since the late 60s, but his first comic book work dates to 1976. There was a lot of talk in this panel about visual storytelling, since he was primarily an artist, but of course the artist is, especially at Marvel Comics, and this is something that he got into quite a bit, is counted on to provide to flesh out the story that's given to them by the writer. So one of the things he talked about was Kirby and the influence of Kirby and how Kirby's dynamic pacing, what's good about Kirby and what isn't good about Kirby, how Kirby would shine through, what he was doing would shine through despite who the different inkers were and what the different inkers would contribute to Jack Kirby's work. And then they kind of got into talking about some of Michael Golden's work. One of the first things they mentioned, which I wasn't aware of, was that he'd done some work on Mr. Miracle. I would later check and find out that he did 3 issues of Mr. Miracle, and I believe this was all in 1978, right around the time of the DC implosion. So Mr. Miracle wound up getting canceled, and this was after, I believe, after Jack Kirby had left DC, and the company decided to continue with the books that he'd done. He also talked about working with Jim Shooter. Not just working with Jim Shooter, but working on Micronauts specifically, the toy tie-in, how he kind of got conned into it, how they didn't really give him the full story at first, and he told stories about, what led him to accept that job, and basically the answer is the DC implosion led him to accept that job, that things were going downhill at DC, things were not looking good. And that led him to accept the job on Micronauts. There was a lot of talk during this panel about his opinion on Marvel and how nobody would give him a deadline, but then all of a sudden he was 4 months behind. And how this was a recurring theme in the time that he spent doing projects for Marvel, and why he doesn't work with Marvel anymore. And he told stories about working with Bill Mantlo, about how some of the characters in Micronauts were developed. He talked a little bit about the one Star Wars issue that he drew, which I believe was issue 38, which apparently was originally based on a story that he came up with, but he didn't end up writing the story that appeared in the comic book. He talked about working on Avengers Annual 10, what it was like to work on that book with Chris Claremont, where Chris Claremont's focus was, where his focus was, and how much he ended up having to bring to the table in order to get the job done because of how little he was given from Chris Claremont and from the powers that be at Marvel. And this, once again, led back into his opinion of the Marvel method and the big flaws in it and his problems with it. And despite all that, despite all the things he had to say about Chris Claremont, he still, after saying all these negative things about Chris Claremont, or all these things that annoyed him about what Chris Claremont did when they were working together on this book, he still had very complimentary things to say about Chris Claremont at the end. Not that the guy is perfect, but that the guy has some very strong points, but he also has some weaknesses. He talked a little bit about a Doctor Strange issue he did, Doctor Strange number 55, which he doesn't think much of, but apparently there's a lot of people who do. I don't think I have read that issue. And he kind of wrapped up probably the last 20 minutes or more of the panel, was talking about DC Comics, his time working as the art editor, something like that, at DC Comics for something like 2 or 3 years. he worked at DC, and how he got the job, what the job did to him, what he thought of the job, and ultimately why he ended up quitting the job, what led him to quit the job. So it was a very passionate panel in the sense that he talked a lot about things that he obviously has very strong feelings about. And a lot of this was about working in the comic book industry, and it wasn't very focused on what he loves as much as it was about things that drive him nuts. So it was a bit of a downer in that sense. But that was basically the panel. I recorded this at some point in the future. I will post this if the audio came out okay. I'll have to test and see. But I thought it was a very interesting conversation, and if you aren't too burned out on listening to older creators talk about problems they have with the comic book industry, both not just today but back then, especially back then, because that's mostly what Golden was talking about, then you might want to listen to this panel. After the Michael Golden panel, my original plan was to go to the Bill Sienkiewicz panel, but the Michael Golden panel ran longer than I thought it would. I thought it was just going to be an hour from 2 to 3, and then the Bill Sienkiewicz panel was from 3 to 4, but the Michael Golden panel ran until about 2:30 or 2:25 or something like that, and I think the reason why they stopped at that point was because there was another panel in that room that was supposed to be happening at 2:30. And so they basically got booted out. Otherwise, who knows how long they would have gone on. And I was enjoying it. Otherwise, I might have left, around 3 o'clock or just before 3 o'clock. But it was a good talk. Although he was a little bit, he's somebody who's had arguments, and so there was a bit of negativity there, which I kind of get a little tired of from some of the older creators. As much as I love them, and I do enjoy Michael Golden's work. He drew the Micronauts, which I talked about on the podcast. He also drew the NAM, the first 12 issues of the NAM, which I didn't talk about on the podcast, but I did read a few years before I started doing the podcast. He also drew Avengers Annual number 10, which is a very important issue. It was written by Chris Claremont, so instead of going to the Bill Sienkiewicz panel, I went to the Image Comics panel, which was called Image. Well, there's more than one, I think, but this one was called Image Comics Sells Out, and this was moderated by Adam Doughty of the Dollar Bin, who I know, and had given me had complained a bit when I didn't include any of his panels. I think he's just moderating 2 of them on the list of panels that I wanted to go to, which I posted on Facebook. But so I decided to go to that one instead of going to the Bill Sienkiewicz panel. Since either way, I was walking in midway through the panel. I think that I missed most of the section where the creators talked about their comics. And so for the most part, what I heard was them talking about getting into comics. The only person on the panel that I knew or that I recognized was Daniel Warren Johnson, whose latest comic book is called Extremity. I don't know anything about it, but I do know him from his webcomic, which is called Space Mullet. I think it's still available online at spacemullet.com. There might be a dash between space and mullet. I'm not sure. And last year I bought the trade collection of Space Mullet from him at Hereos Con. So I heard about a half hour of this panel. It ended at 4 o'clock. At that point, I went back downstairs again to the big room, to the showroom floor, and I walked around some more. I bought a few more comics. This time, the comics I bought had a definite theme to them. Well, I guess they did the first time around because they were all 2001 comics. This time around, the theme was, well, for the most part, they all fell into one theme, which was Teen Titans. I've been reading I recently read the the New Teen Titans Volume 1, which is the first collection of the 1980, the first New Teen Titans series by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. And I've ordered Volumes 2 and 3, and I would really like to read all the way through Volume 8. I think the first 6 are out at this point. There's 2 more coming out, which will carry all the way through the end of the Tales of the Teen Titans. So at this booth, which was interesting because they had some boxes of comic books, but they were also selling empty comic book boxes with like designs printed on them. I don't remember the name of the dealer, but what I got from them was I got 3 issues, the 3 issues from the Tales of the Teen Titans in the 40s that I'm missing, which were issues 46, 47, and 48. I also picked up an issue from the New Teen Titans, number 33, which I don't have, and I'm kind of trying to fill in as much as I can of that series. I don't think I'm ever going to have all of them because some of them are extremely expensive, like the first couple issues. The second issue was the introduction of Deathstroke, the Terminator. Now, those issues are all in the first volume of, issues 1 through 8, plus the preview from DC Comics Presents number 26 are all in that first volume. And so I've read those issues, but honestly I don't know if I'll ever own those issues, just because I can't see myself. If I could find reader copies for very inexpensively, I probably would buy them, just because I want to be able to read like the letters pages and those sorts of things. And that's part of the reason why I picked these up, because after all, I'm planning to buy the collected editions of this series. So I also picked up 2 issues of Tales of the New Teen Titans, not to be confused with Tales of the Teen Titans. Tales of the New Teen Titans came out, I think, in like 81 or 80, I think like 82 or maybe even 83. And these were kind of reprinting or retelling the origin stories of 4 of the Teen Titans. Raven, Starfire, Cyborg, and Changeling. 3 of them, of course, were new, completely new characters in New Teen Titans. The other one who was not was Changeling, who had been previously known and was later subsequently also known as Beast Boy. And then the only other comic I bought from this dealer was an issue of Miracle Man. I'm sorry, Mr. Miracle. Not Miracle Man, Mr. Miracle. And this issue, the reason why I picked this up was because I had learned during the Michael Golden panel that Michael Golden had drawn some issues of Mr. Miracle. So when I saw this, I wondered if this was one of them. So then I looked it up on my phone, and it was. I also could see that there was 3 issues that he drew. I think this is the 3rd one that he drew. So this may be the last issue from that run of Mr. Miracle. So this is after Jack Kirby had left DC. Kind of like Commandy, I know, was another book that was taken over by somebody else. And I believe all of these books got canceled during the DC implosion in, I think it was 1978. So all of these books, they were $1 a piece, and they're all bagged and have backings, and not all of them are in great shape, but it's still kind of neat to have some of these. So I bought all of these, and this was between the end of the 4 o'clock panel and the beginning of the 3 o'clock panel and the beginning of the 5 o'clock panel that I wanted to go to. So after buying all those comics, I went back upstairs to the panel rooms for the storytelling panel. The comic book storytelling panel, which started at 5 o'clock, for the most part consisted of a presentation and a talk by Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, was also a comic book writer prior to that. He was the editor-in-chief at Marvel during I think it started in the late 70s through like the mid-1980s. He had been a writer at DC, and he was one of I think he wrote his first story when he was still a teenager. He sold his first story to DC. a Legion of Superhero story, and I think he wrote it for a time. But this presentation, he basically, the idea was he wanted to use a story written by Stan Lee, drawn by Jack Kirby, to illustrate how a story can be told and how he thinks a story should be told. Although he probably wouldn't have gone that far. He would say, this is the way a good story is told, or something like that. He wasn't so adamant that a story had to be told this way, but he was just trying, I think, to show what good storytelling is. And the story that he used was from Strange Tales number 114, although he in the presentation, at least what I wrote down, was 103. I don't know if I just wrote down the wrong thing, or he didn't, or he said the wrong thing. But I looked it up because it is available on Marvel Unlimited, and I recorded this panel. But the only thing that you miss, well, primarily the only thing that you miss is him. Is the issue itself, which you can look at the issue to get the information, the visual information that you're missing on Marvel Unlimited, or it's probably been reprinted in a few places. In fact, he talked about how it had been reprinted, I think, in a Captain America comic book, and so he would buy old copies of that Captain America comic book and hand that out to writers and artists at Marvel Comics to show them this is how a story should be told. He didn't think it was a great story. He didn't love the story, but he thought it was a very good illustration of how to tell a story and how Kirby would tell a story. He talked about very briefly about the beginnings of the visual, verbal combination of visual, verbal media in commercials. He dates it back to 1896. He talked about the three different kinds of shots, and this was something that permeated, which ran throughout his talk, on the three different kinds of shots: the close-up, the medium shot, and the long shot. The close-up shot being a reaction shot, the medium shot being the action. So maybe you should say the action shot, the reaction shot, and then a large-scale action shot. So medium, close-up, and long. He talked about oblong field of vision, which is what we have. Then, in other words, what we see are kind of an oblong, oval type shape, and which is the way movie screens look like, what they are. So he got into talking about this comic book, and he went through it panel by panel. And I got to say that at this point in the presentation, I got a little tired. And I think I got a little tired because it was a little too much. See, he's doing this here, and he's doing this here, and he's doing this here, and here he's doing this, and here he's doing this, and see, he's doing it again, and see, he's doing it again. And it was not interesting enough, this part of the presentation. Fortunately, this was not the bulk of his presentation, but he did go through the entire story panel by panel. In the process of going through this, he talked about scenes in movies as well. He talked about scenes in Rocky. He talked about scenes in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He talked about scenes in E.T. He compared and contrasted Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, the two men who combined to work on Raiders of the Lost Ark, and what each of them, their strengths and their weaknesses were, and how they complemented each other so much, and why that movie worked so well on account of that. He told stories about working with Frank Miller. He had this idea that he called that there's 98% of people, most people fall into what he called the 98%. And he wasn't real specific about what that was. I think he was more interested in the other 2%. And those other 2% break down into two different groups, a 1% and a 1%. The first 1%, he said, were the people who do great work but don't know how to explain it. Or they can try to explain it, or they may talk about it like they're explaining it, but it doesn't make any sense. They're unable to communicate the information that they have. And then the other 1% that he talked about are people who do good work, but who can explain it, who know how to explain it. And he gave examples of both those. And I mean, he gave names of people who he felt belonged in each of those categories. And one of the things he illustrated through a story, I believe this was a story he told about Frank Miller, was the idea that the creators know the story. The creators see the story. And so it's not just a matter of drawing something neat. It's a matter of communicating the stories that they have in their heads. And basically he told the story about finally getting that through to Frank Miller and what he had to do that, and then how Frank took that and did things with it that he didn't expect. He took a number of questions from the audience on different things, all related to this topic of storytelling. He got questions about manga, and one of the things he said about manga, and there was one person in the audience who asked a question which was not about manga, but who mentioned manga in a very derisive? No, I don't know if maybe derisive is the right word. Derogatory, yeah, let's say derogatory way. But what Shooter had to say about manga was that manga is very simple. Well, I don't know if he said it exactly that way, but he said that the panels are not as complex as what you will find in a lot of American comic books, and because of that, it takes a lot longer to tell a story. Another question he got was about, and I don't think it was specifically about Frank Miller's run on Daredevil, his initial run, or maybe either of his runs on Daredevil, but the question he got was, did you know this was great stuff when you were seeing it? And my recollection is basically he said yes, that he did, or he knew that it was something special. I don't know if he conceded that he knew that this was going to be timeless stuff, but he knew that it was something special. And I think the main piece of evidence he gave for that was the way that other people reacted to it. It wasn't just his reaction to it. It was other people in the office. They would all be wanting to see what Frank had drawn. And he talked about his time working with Frank quite a bit in this. And I think he holds Frank in quite high regard, even the stuff he's doing today, which I think gets a lot of negative comments. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think I've read any of his current stuff. The closest thing I've read to his current stuff was his writing on All-Star Batman and Robin. Yeah, that's the most current thing I've read. For the most part, the things I've read that Frank Miller has written was his Daredevil work, both Born Again, which I did an episode on, and his original run, which I have not talked about on the podcast, other than in passing like this. He also got a question about animation and whether it was better or does it do anything better than comics do. And I think probably the most interesting thing that he talked about was Jack Kirby's method for moving through the panels from panel to panel, and how Kirby had this problem because he was being expected to tell this big story and he only had so many pages, so many panels to do it, and it was how he broke it up, and how Shooter said that Kirby would take the biggest leap possible. He would lead the reader from panel to panel, but there would sometimes be huge leaps between panels, but it was not insurmountable, or there was things that would lead the reader from one panel to the next, and I can't even get into exactly what Shooter said. But once again, I did tape this panel, and I do plan on posting the recording of this panel, and I thought this was a fascinating discussion. If you want to follow along with what he was saying about the comic book, it is available on Marvel Unlimited, and if you don't have Marvel Unlimited, you can probably buy it through Comixology And the issue is Strange Tales number 114. It involves a fight. It's an issue in which I think Captain America has been brainwashed or something like that. And so a fight breaks out between Captain America and the Human Torch. And but anyway, this was a really great presentation. I'm really glad that I went to it. It's the first time that I've heard Jim Shooter speak at a comic book convention. I don't even know if I've heard him on a podcast before or not. And if I have, it probably hasn't been more than a single one. At 6:30, once the panel was over, I returned to the showroom floor. I walked around some more. I stopped and I decided to try and check on the 2 commissions that I had not picked up yet. I stopped and talked to Dave Wachter, who was doing a commission for me of the Medusa, and I don't mean the Marvel character Medusa, but the woman with the snakes for hair, whose gaze turns people to stone. I think it's 2. Do I have 1 or do I have 2 commissions already of her? I know I have at least 1 from Chandra Free, which I really like. Which I got probably, I think that was in 2013, so like 4 years ago, which I really like. I want to say I have another one, but I can't think of. Maybe I don't. Maybe this will only be my second one. But I'm really looking forward to see what. So I stopped. I talked to him. Unfortunately, he hadn't finished it yet. He said he was going to be working on these. He had a bunch of commissions to finish up. So he suggested I come back tomorrow or Sunday, and so we talked briefly, and then I moved along. I tried to stop and see Joey Weiser, who's the third and final artist who I have a commission coming from. Unfortunately, every time I walked by his table, for the most part, he wasn't there, and once or twice that he was there, he was talking to somebody. And I tried waiting around for about 30 seconds, but it didn't look like it was going to wrap up too quickly. So I just kind of moved along. I mean, I figured there'll be plenty of time to pick up this commission tomorrow or the next day, hopefully. Although, God knows it's going to be considerably busier on that showroom floor tomorrow. So I didn't have much time left because there was only a half hour between the time that the storytelling panel ended and the show closed for the night, but I wound up stopping at another dealer's table, and flipping through some boxes just to see if they had anything that interested me. And this isn't always the case, but once again, I ran across some stuff that I wanted to buy. And some of these were things, I'd say these are all things that I've been interested in getting. Some of which I didn't think I would ever find at these prices. His comics were all $1. There was some organization, so like he had them organized by the first letter in the title, but and not always, because, well, anyway, let me get into I started back towards the end of the alphabet, and the first thing I found were some issues of Wonder Woman. This was when John Byrne was writing and drawing the book that I was interested in reading, and these are issues. There's a 4-part story, and I don't. Wow, that was really loud. The motorcycle, I think, going by on the highway. But there was a 4-part story of Wonder Woman that was kind of a throwback to the World War II. And I really don't know anything else about it other than that. But he didn't have all 4 of the issues, but he had 3 of them. So I picked up those 3, issues 130, 131, and 133. So he was missing 132, and I'll just have to look and see if I can find 132 for a reasonable price. I also picked up 134, which I think is the next to last issue in Byrne's run, and that's Who is Donna Troy's story. And I think that's a 2-parter, so I think 135 has a conclusion to that story, and I believe that's the last issue that Byrne wrote and drew of Wonder Woman. And then I also found the first issue of Tales of the New Teen Titans, and this is the one that tells the origin of Cyborg. So I'm only missing issue 3 from that series. Now that series is included in the collections, the collected editions that I've started to buy. I think they're included in volume 3. And so my interest in having these is to have the original issue. I don't care as much about the shape it's in, but I'm more interested in the letters pages or the editorial content that might be in these issues. In addition to those comics, I also found 2 issues of Uncanny X-Men that I used to own once upon a time. There was a time when I had a subscription to Uncanny X-Men. I had basically from just after Byrne left, when I think Cockrum immediately was the next, came back with issue 144, I believe it was. Or was it 140? Yeah, I think it was 144. Or was it 145? Anyhow, I had from 145 up to about 183, I think it was. I think that's when I finally gave up on X-Men. And I acquired most of those, or quite a few of those. I had a subscription, I think from about 151 for like probably up to like 175 or something like that. Yeah, I had a subscription. So these are 2 issues that I definitely used to have, and I no longer have any of those issues. So issue 159, I think this is the first, or is this the second, of the stories that involves Dracula, because Dracula also shows up in one of the annuals. And I think I have a collected edition, I think I have the X-Men Essentials that collects these issues along with quite a few others. So I'm not sure if this is the follow-up to the annual or this is the prequel to the annual. But, and issue 158, I think, is the return of Rogue, or it certainly involves Rogue. But I haven't read these again. But these are both drawn by Dave Cockrum. No, I'm sorry. The issue 158 is drawn by Dave Cockrum. Issue 159 is drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz with inks by Bob Wyacek. And let's see, does he do the inks on 158 also? Yes, he does. He inked both of those issues. And, of course, they were both written by Chris Claremont. I would love to get all of those issues again. I will probably settle for reading them on Marvel Unlimited one of these days. But that was a run of comics that I really did enjoy, and I just wasn't thinking straight when I got rid of them. And I don't think I got very much for them either. But so that was basically it for the convention for me today. At 7 o'clock, I basically left right at 7 o'clock. I walked back to the car. And then I came back to the hotel. It's kind of funny because I believe in leaving a tip for the housekeeping staff, for the people who clean the rooms. And I walked in, and the tip that I had left was still there, and the bed was unmade, and it was apparent that nobody had come in to clean, because I assumed they would, at the very least, would have taken the money. But so I guess I'll leave that tip. I'll just leave that laying on the counter there. And if they come in to clean tomorrow, they can take it tomorrow. But I'm not going to add anything to it because they didn't do any cleaning today. At least not in the room I'm staying in. And it's not like I made a complete mess here, but, there's a couple things that could be straightened up here. So I cleaned up a little bit, and then I went out and I got something to eat. I went to a Vietnamese restaurant called, the Vietnamese restaurant is called Lang Van Vietnamese. And it was not right next to the hotel. It was about a 15-minute drive. I've resorted to using I don't like to use the directions, where it tells you turn here, usually. I like to think I can get around well enough without them, but after a few experiences of thinking I could just eyeball it on the map and I'd be able to make the turns in the right place, I've decided it's just not worth it. For the most part, Charlotte has streets going all sorts of different directions. This is not DC, which has a grid, and I think is a little easier, at least within the city, to get around. There's just too many different parkways and thoroughfares going across, and they're not all highways, and so I just decided to use to follow the directions to get to where I wanted to go. But the food was very good. I had ginger stir fry with shrimp, and I was very happy with that. And after that, I wanted a little more something. I wanted a little something sweet. And I was thinking of just going to a convenience store and getting like an ice cream bar or something like that. But I typed in ice cream on Yelp, and it took me to this place called Insomnia Cookies, which serves both cookies and ice cream. I thought about just getting cookies, but I didn't like the cookies I saw there. They looked a little too sweet for me. So I got ice cream instead. And thankfully, I have a freezer here in the room because by the time I got the ice cream, I didn't feel like eating it that much. I've had a little bit of it, and it's quite good. I got chocolate ice cream. And they really gave me quite a bit for $5. I guess it wasn't a huge amount. It's not like but, well, I'd say it was probably almost half a pint what they gave me. So I brought the ice cream back, and it's nice to have a freezer here, a full-size refrigerator and a freezer to put it in. And I'll probably eat a little more after I record and maybe finish it off tomorrow. So on the whole, I think today was a really good day. I think I got to go to 2 great panels. It's a shame I didn't get to go to the Bill Sienkiewicz panel, but oh well, too bad. I'm very happy with the comic books that I bought. I really haven't taken the time to look through them or to see how they, to see how they read or to read any of them. My days at these conventions are very full. It's a little after midnight at this point, and I think I'm going to get ready to go to bed. The convention opens up at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I want to be there. I want to make sure I get a decent parking place. I got lucky with the rain today. I did not get caught in any rain. And I don't think it rained very much in the Charlotte area today, despite what the predictions were. So I'm looking forward to day 2. I'm looking forward to the panels I'm going to go to tomorrow, and there are 3 of them. And I may do some more comic book buying. I've bought 19 comic books so far, not counting the stuff I bought as presents. I certainly looked at other things, but I didn't pick anything up, as in buy anything or steal. So that's it for day 1 of Heroes Con 2017. That's it for episode 137. Episode 138 will be more of the same, with me talking about the second day of Heroes Con 2017. Dave Talks Comics can be found at davetalkscomics.com, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and a few other locations. You can keep up with what I have currently been reading at davetalkscomicsnotes.blogspot.com and what I've been watching at smallscreenscrawls.blogspot.com. Links to both these blogs can be found at davetalkscomics.com under the Other Blogs header on the right-hand side of the page. If you have comments or questions, I can be reached at davetalkscomics@gmail.com, on Twitter at davetalkscomics, or leave a comment on my website. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.